We live in an age of constant upheaval, yet the engine of the global economy hums along without skipping a beat. Millions of people have taken to the streets. From the Arab Spring to Eastern Europe, citizens have successfully organized to topple regime after regime. This chart tracks global protests against wealth inequality. While our collective ability to organize has surged, the gap between the ultra-rich and the working class has widened to historic extremes, and stable employment has quietly evaporated. How is it that mass movements are winning on the streets, but the average worker is steadily losing ground? The answer traces back to a specific moment in the 20th century, a moment when the political left traded its most potent tool of economic class struggle for an entirely different set of priorities. For generations, the political left built its foundation entirely around the industrial working class. The factory floor was viewed as the central engine of political leverage. That consensus fractured in the 1960s. Thinkers like Herbert Marcuse began to argue that the traditional worker had been bought off by the comforts of the post-war welfare state. In their view, the working class had grown too comfortable to drive real systemic change. Marcuse proposed a new vanguard, which he called alternative revolutionary forces. He redirected the political focus toward marginalized minority groups and the growing population of educated youth on university campuses. The language of economic distribution and labor rights was gradually replaced by a focus on cultural identity and social liberation. By discarding the worker as the primary agent of change, the left severed its strongest tie to the economy. The working class was left adrift, searching for a political movement that still cared about their material survival. At the same time, the tactics of resistance were being rewritten by a political scientist named Gene Sharp. Sharp codified 1900 methods of nonviolent action, framing protest as a highly effective, deeply practical form of combat. Sharp identified the centralized state as the primary source of violence and oppression. His manuals taught activists how to systematically dismantle a government's authority, but they offered zero critique of the underlying economic system. Because Sharp's methods focused entirely on political regime change rather than economic redistribution, they found enthusiastic support within the U.S. defense establishment. Cold War strategists recognized that his apolitical protests could be weaponized against rival nations. These exact strategies were deployed across the Baltics and Eastern Europe. Activists used Sharp's blueprint to successfully paralyze and collapse Soviet-aligned governments. Sharp's manuals provided a systematic roadmap for regime change. But by stripping these protests of any demand for economic equality, they created a weapon capable of toppling dictators while remaining silent on who would control the resources left behind. The immediate goal was achieved. The central planning apparatus of the Soviet bloc was dismantled. But with no pro-worker program to replace the old state, these newly opened societies were subjected to rapid privatization and severe austerity. Public assets were sold off, social safety nets evaporated, and millions plunged into deep poverty. We see this exact sequence repeat in modern uprisings. Crowds successfully demand the removal of a corrupt leader, yet the economic structures that exploit them remain untouched or grow even harsher. When a state collapses without an organized economic alternative, the vacuum is typically filled by the only forces with ready-made programs, international lenders, and neoliberal advisors who treat the transition as an opportunity for market expansion. The philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari once posed a jarring question about human nature. How is it that people can fight stubbornly for their own servitude, acting as if it were their salvation? Modern capitalism isn't threatened by demands for cultural expression or minority representation. It absorbs those identities, strips them of their radical edge, and packages them into highly profitable new markets. This diagram illustrates how the system operates. Our genuine desire for individual freedom is captured and processed through the market. We are encouraged to rebel culturally, even as that very system erodes our material security. As a result, much of modern political protest has morphed into a form of moral theater, driven by an educated, urban middle class who are largely insulated from the most brutal realities of the wage economy. As the movement's leadership shifted toward urban professionals, the language of the left moved from labor issues to post-material cultural values. For the workers still focused on the factory gates, this new discourse often frames their material anxieties as an obstacle to progress. Feeling abandoned by their traditional allies, many see right-wing populism as the only remaining outlet for their grievances. Winning a new civil right or successfully deposing a dictator offers little comfort to a population if the new government immediately slashes their healthcare and freezes their wages. A political opposition that severs itself from the struggles of the working class is no longer a revolutionary threat. It is simply providing free demolition labor, tearing down the old borders so that the machinery of global capital can quietly and endlessly expand.